Welcome aboard, everybody. We'll get started in just a few more seconds. Okay, along with that, I'm Mike. I'm from GTAC. I'll be the host for today. So I want to welcome all of you on board. And again, it's going to be really focused on a critical issue, which is about hiring in a contact center. And I don't know about where you are, but I know that the clients that I've had, hiring is a huge issue with a lot of turnover, hard to get good people, especially in this kind of a labor market, and hard to keep them as well. So you want to make sure you're getting really good people and you go and keep them on board as well. So I have some great information there about that. So again, my name is Mike Aoki from GTAC. I'm one of the volunteers with GTAC, the Greater Toronto Area Contact Center Association. And I want to welcome all of you to today's session. And in terms of GTAC itself, again, based out of Toronto, but we do offer webinars that anyone, and we have people from all across the world here, can attend and learn more about the contact center industry as we go forward. So welcome to today's session. Again, I'll mention just a brief thing about GTAC as well. So Ravina, if you want to just advance a slide one more. All right, perfect. Thank you very much. I just want to mention quickly with GTAC, again, the Greater Toronto Area Contact Center Association. We do a lot of these webinars, typically one every month or one every couple of months as far as webinars. We're doing a full day in-person event. So for those folks that are in Toronto, we'll be back in Toronto sometime in September 23rd. We are doing our 13th annual full day conference as well. And so we'll have a series of speakers, breakout sessions, panel discussions, really focused in terms of helping the contact center industry. So I'll do a shameless plug for that, okay, in terms of doing that. And I'll put the info in the chat window in case anyone's curious about finding out more about that particular session. So again, I want to thank all of you for coming here. Quick little intro as well with this. I want to introduce Raveen Shah. And Raveen is the CEO at Hello Hire. And it's a software platform that helps contact centers hire agents faster or reduce recruiting time and costs as well. And I'll actually leave it up to Raveen to introduce his guest, Kat, as well. So Raveen, I'll turn things over to you. Okay, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. We're really excited to be a part of the GTAC community. Thank you so much for hosting and for moderating. You're awesome. And to everyone joining us today, if you're involved with contact center recruitment, time is precious. So thank you for being here. Our goal is to make this time worthwhile for you. As Mike said, my name is Raveen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hello Hire. We're on a mission to make recruiting agents more efficient while keeping the process human. As a special thank you, we're offering everyone watching this webinar a free month of Hello Hire. We'll drop the details in the chat, and if you're interested, please take advantage of that offer. Now, please allow me to introduce you to our special guest, Katera Ghafouri, Director of Recruiting and Training at Zed Solutions. Katera is a highly experienced HR leader with over 10 years of experience in the contact center industry. And now that we've had a chance to work together for a while, I've come to know her as Kat. Kat, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you're responsible for at Zed?
For sure. Thank you, Raveen, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Katera Ghafouri. I am the Director of Recruiting and Training here at Zed. My role currently, I'm essentially responsible for overseeing everything under the HR umbrella, specifically with a focus on, of course, recruiting and training. I started with Zed in 2015. Prior to that, I also worked with another BPO in a very similar capacity. My current team right now consists of 2 full-time recruiters, talent acquisition specialists. I have 2 full-time call center recruiters on my team and an additional 8 quality assurance monitors. So my umbrella is pretty big.
Thanks, Kat.
My pleasure.
And thank you for bringing your experience, your expertise, and knowledge to the group today. I'm super excited to be doing this webinar with you. So let's jump right in. If you're responsible for putting butts in seats, this webinar is for you. You might sit on the operational side and be worried about hitting KPIs. After all, it's not just butts in seats. You need the right agents that are going to stick around. And on the other hand, you might sit on the HR or talent acquisition side and are closer to the hiring challenges. Your recruiters are burnt out and overworked, trying to find the quality agents your operational team is looking for. Either way, this webinar is for you. I don't need to tell you this, but hiring agents is harder than ever. Everybody is hiring, and you're not just competing with other contact centers anymore. You're competing with other industries, new working models, work from home, new life priorities. Hiring great talent has never been harder. but it's not your fault. With all the other post-pandemic changes, we've been hit with a huge change in the job market. We went from a world where we had more people than jobs to now having more jobs than people. It's a fundamental shift that changes everything. And, I work with contact centers with operations globally, and it doesn't matter where the contact center is located. It's always a competitive hiring market. You're always competing for the top talent. We were told the labor shortage was because of the pandemic and that when the subsidies ended, everyone would come back to work. But this was just plain wrong. This labor shortage isn't new. It's been a growing problem for over 10 years. It just hit us really hard because of the pandemic. If you take a close look at this graph, you'll see the number of people voluntarily leaving the workforce every year since 2009. And in 2020, when the pandemic hit, there was so much uncertainty that people just held on to their jobs. But in 2021, we went right back to that linear trend. So the labor shortage is here to stay. This is our new normal. And this new normal has created new problems for us. And one of the biggest problems we hear is that there just aren't enough qualified applicants. You get people to apply to your job, but it feels like the majority of them are not interested or not qualified, and it's hard to find the applicants that you're looking for. Another huge problem is ghosting. When you do finally get in touch with a candidate and book an interview, almost 50% of the time, the candidate doesn't show up. This is a massive waste of time and can be super frustrating. And at the end of the day, these challenges are making it impossible to meet hiring objectives. And if you don't fill your seats, or even worse, if you fill your seats with the wrong agents, it's just bad for the business. You won't be able to deliver exceptional customer service or customer experience, and your KPIs will suffer. The problem is your hiring process. You're recruiting like you did 25 years ago and are experiencing the symptoms of an outdated recruiting process. You don't know it, but this is causing you to miss out on your best candidates. Any friction, anything, any step at all that you put in front of an applicant from when they express interest to when they have an interview is bad. It's driving people away. And any time that you take in responding or engaging with an applicant increases the chances of that person accepting another job. Any delays in scheduling, aligning schedules, going back and forth extends the time to meet a candidate, and two things happen. One, the longer it takes for you to meet that candidate, the higher the likelihood of them taking another job. And when you slot in a candidate for an interview and now that person doesn't show up, you've made it harder for someone who is really interested in the job to get an interview. And this is just a vicious cycle, which ends up in people taking jobs somewhere else and you feeling like, you're just being ghosted all the time. Throwing money at ads or hiring more recruiters is not the answer. Don't get me wrong, you need ads and you need recruiters, but if you do everything the way you've always done it, you're going to experience the same results. I work with contact leaders every single day and I hear the same questions. They really paint the problem that's being felt by a large portion of the industry. The good news is that you're not alone, but to solve these problems, you need to look at these questions a little bit differently. And so instead of asking, how do we get more qualified applicants? You should be asking, how do we make it easier to apply and engage? And instead of asking, how do we stop the no-shows and the ghosting? You should be asking, how do we engage quickly and entice candidates to show up? And lastly, instead of asking, how do we fill our positions when there's so much competition? You should be asking, how do we act fast and be the ones to beat the competition? What you really need to do is invite every interested applicant to an interview as quickly as possible. I know it sounds crazy, and let that sink in for a second. But if someone is interested in your job, meet them, ideally right away. When we had more people than jobs, we created technology and systems to screen people out. Phone screens, video screens, assessment screens, you name it. It was all there so we would spend less time meeting candidates with the hopes of filtering out unsuitable candidates and trying to meet the best candidates. What that's doing for us today is it's just filtering out everyone, especially your top applicants. This does not work in today's world. Fortunately, there is new technology out there that doesn't just make interviewing applicants possible, it makes it easy. And if one good thing came out of the pandemic, it's that it made everyone a pro at video calls. I honestly remember getting on a Zoom call with my 90-year-old grandmother on the other side of the world. And so if my grandma can do it, believe me, anyone can do it. And speed interview platforms allow you to conduct short virtual interviews with qualified and interested applicants in under 24 hours without having to do any admin work. The way it works is pretty simple. Pick some dates that you want to interview your future hires. Invite your applicants to interview in bulk by sending them all a link to your interview booking page. After that, software takes over. It does screening, scheduling, reminders, communication, and pretty much brings your recruiting team a lineup of candidates to interview back-to-back over video. And when you do things differently, you get different results. And in the case of Zed Solutions, the results were incredible. Kat, let's take it back to the first time we met. Do you remember that? Tell us what was going on at that time. What did life look like for you?
For sure. So our first interaction was right at the beginning of our spring ramp. And essentially during this time frame, our organization goes from essentially having a very small group of permanent staff that we run throughout the year for an inbound customer care program to a seasonal ramp of essentially going from about 10 to 15 agents throughout the year, right up into 60, upwards of 75 agents based on the busiest time of the year for this particular client. So when we initially met, I was in the middle of transitioning a talent acquisition specialist. So I was already looking to onboard net new talent for my own team. But in addition to that, gearing up for this particular ramp. It's one thing to, go through ramp season and know we're going to all have to essentially roll up our sleeves and go through our recruitment cycle, have back-to-back interviews, back-to-back phone screens, making sure our ads are all updated and constantly getting applicants in. But then add in a net new talent acquisition specialist makes things kind of challenging. So that's basically where we are at.
Kat, that is a lot of agents to hire all at once. And I mentioned this to you earlier. I work alongside a lot of contact center leaders that hire in volume like you, but I've never done it myself. And so it seems overwhelming and daunting just to think about it. So what did your hiring process look like back then? Talk to us about what it was like. What was the process like? How would you do it?
Sure. So our hiring process was a traditional recruitment cycle. We would have our ads activated on various job boards. We had different partners within the community that we worked with. And from there, we would follow a standard traditional cycle, going from screening resumes to starting with phone screens, doing a very high level assessment on the phone with a particular candidate. And then from there, determining whether or not that candidate, kind of checked off all the boxes and were suitable to come in for an in-person interview. Obviously, with the pandemic as well, we were transitioning back and forth from remote interviews to on-site interviews and whatnot. So all in all, I would say that the cycle was very heavy on the administrative side. If you think back to how much time our talent acquisition specialists were spending just in reviewing resumes, just in picking up the phone and trying to connect with a candidate. That doesn't always happen on your first attempt. And I'm sure everybody on this call would agree. It takes time. You got to schedule follow-ups, call back. You get voicemails from candidates. You got to follow up with those people. And so all of that is obviously very time consuming. So, in a nutshell, that's what our recruitment cycle was. It was your traditional cycle, going through the motions and taking the time for each and every single one of those candidates to get on the phone with us before we would step into next steps.
Kat, that sounds pretty much like how most companies are hiring today. And I think you called out some of the challenges, right? It's just time consuming, manual, unpredictable. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's just hours of effort, human effort to really just find the people that are actually interested in the job and are, to vet that they're qualified. Before we kind of go into some, more details about how it worked and what you changed, why don't we just talk about your current hiring process? So what does it look like now? And, what's different?
So I'd have to say the biggest difference for us is efficiency. We are so much more efficient. From a screening perspective, both screening a resume and then making that initial contact for a phone screen, that was taking the bulk of the recruiter's time. When you go into high volume recruitment and high volume hiring, especially for things like seasonal ramps and temporary employment opportunities, you're spending the bulk of your week just trying to get a hold of people and getting a hold of candidates that are suitable for the roles that you're looking to fulfill. So what's different now? The biggest difference right now is my team is just so much more efficient. We, going from spending hours on end just trying to contact somebody, we now are in a position where we receive applicants, and from there, to your point earlier, we send out one mass invite. We pick the times. And so from a scheduling perspective, even with my recruiters, this makes it really easy for them because they can now coordinate their days, right? So they pick in advance when they want to hold their sessions. They're able to determine how many people they would like registered for any given session. And from that, once that invitation is sent out and we predetermine when those speed interview sessions are going to happen, they can spend the rest of their time doing things like reference checks, doing things like background checks, and connecting with folks for other reasons, and doing all of the administrative work that comes with onboarding new team members. So that's, I would say, the biggest difference is having a much more efficient team, and ultimately being able to take on bigger hiring requirements, right? And being able to do that with the team that I already have in place, as opposed to looking to increase the number of resources that are dedicated to recruitment specifically, et cetera.
Thanks, Kat. With that, I'm going to kind of stop the screen share and really just hone in on really just the conversation Q&A. Really want to learn a little bit more about how you implemented this process, some of the other things that are, that you've seen improve. And so maybe let's start with, recruiting team. You mentioned that it's more efficient and you're able to do more with the team you have. Being in a sort of a recession scare timeframe, what does that mean for you? What has it meant for growth, for headcount, things like that?
So from a resource perspective and growth perspective, you have your existing team in place, and our organization has been fortunate enough to be in a position of growth and be in a position where we've onboarded new clients. With that, you are also now adding additional staffing requirements, right? So it's not just your existing clients, your existing team, and your, BAU regular staffing requirements that we know are, pre-scheduled and have an idea of what's kind of in the books. But what this gave us the ability to do is onboard new clients, onboard new business, but in addition to that, maintain our existing team and not have to onboard an additional recruiter because we're now adequately staffed with the existing team to take on that much more. So when earlier I talked about our spring ramp season, that's only for one client. Now add every other client that we have and all of their requirements also within the call center industry. And I'm sure everybody on this call can also agree, you have you have attrition to worry about, you have attrition staffing to fulfill. And that's all business as usual. That's all, part of our day to day. So being able to take on more with the existing team from a business perspective, from an efficiency perspective, from a return on investment perspective, like it just makes sense. Right now, just to give you an example, aside from our spring ramp, which we happen to be in again, we're going through that ramp with our eyes closed. I don't want to say it's easy, it certainly isn't, but having this tool in place and giving us the ability to cast that wide net, reach out to all of those candidates, and get responses and connect with them in relatively short order has been profoundly beneficial for me and for my team. Makes it a lot easier.
That's amazing. And on the topic of team, what are your recruiting team members, what do they think of it? Like, do you get any feedback from them? Is there any, you're laughing, I guess maybe. What do they say?
Yeah, I certainly do get a lot of feedback. So, kind of just going back to our initial test phase. I remember my recruiter knocking on my door and she came in and she was like, Kat, wow. Oh my goodness. Wow. I've never talked to that many people in such a short period of time. This was going to take me like a week to do, and I did it in an hour. And that's relatively the same from the rest of the team members. Anybody that I've introduced to the tool, of course, over the last year and a bit, I have had some changes on my team as well. So anyone that's been recently introduced, the conversations are all very similar. It's, oh, this is so much easier. I don't have to pick up the phone and call 50 people. I can send an invite to 50 people, and then I can pick one to talk to them. So the feedback has been nothing but positive from my team, and myself included. I've conducted some speed interviews myself as well. So certainly is all good news.
And before I remember that recruiter in particular and doing a call with you and her, and I remember it's exhausting. Like, we have to be real as well.
Yeah.
To meet so many people in a short amount of time, it's exhausting. And if you're not used to it or experienced it, like, you don't do 2 hours of this or 3. It's like, you got to do it in doses, right? Like, it's exhausting.
Yeah. So I actually remember that conversation as well. The feedback that she gave me was all great. And then she took a deep breath and she's like, but I will say it was a lot. And so during that phase, we also did some test runs, right? We did some test runs with length, with the number of registrations. And that's really important too, because it helped us fine tune kind of what works best for us, from a scheduling perspective, from a timing perspective. But yeah, certainly, I mean, if we had any feedback, it was, wow, was that exhausting? I talked to so many people in such a short period of time. Let's kind of take a look at this again and see how we can make it better, for sure.
Totally. And we hear that all the time where, you do you tweak it so that it fits your needs, your team, and there's no one size fits all. But the first time I ever ran a speed interview, I remember, it's not easy, right? It's a lot, but it's efficient and it gets the job done quickly. So in terms of other benefits or impacts, so I think we talked about, obviously, it's more efficient, recruiters like it. What about the time it takes to hire? Have you seen, what's the reduction in time to hire? What have you seen there?
So we certainly have seen a reduction, quite a significant reduction. And the reason that reduction really comes into play is because we now have the ability to reach out to folks a lot quicker, right? Kind of thinking back to traditional recruitment cycles, it's going to take a recruiter time, right? It's going to take them time to pick up the phone, to screen those resumes, to pick up the phone, to connect with a candidate, to assess the candidate. That in itself, before you actually determine, okay, this person has the skill set that I'm looking for, or at least high level, they've started to check off those boxes, and you'd like to have a more detailed conversation with them, that in itself is very time consuming. And so the difference between that and now is we're just a lot faster. So you're connecting with those people a lot quicker. So now your timing, traditionally it would, for let's say a class of 12 FTE, would take us about 2 weeks from start to finish. We're now conducting classes, hiring requirements within about a week. So roughly about a 50% reduction in the time that it takes. And just to kind of highlight that a little bit further, given that we're in our current ramp season, just to give everybody an example, my current ramp, I've got classes starting every week, and happy to say we're hitting those numbers. So
amazing. And that's no small feat in today's market, right? I think we hear people not being able to hit their class sizes and having to deal with smaller class sizes, but you're clearly hitting those numbers, which is amazing. One of the questions I always get, and I love your input here, is what does this mean for the quality of hire? And really, we see tend to measure that in graduation rates, in retention. What have you seen there? Is there, tell us about that.
So absolutely. I mean, it's not just about, for lack of a better way of putting it, bums and seats, right? You want to provide a great customer experience, and you want to make sure your KPIs are met, and you want to make sure, in the recruitment world, it's always, you got to find the right person for the job, find the right person. And we constantly hear that, right? So it's find the right person for the job, the right skill set, everything else falls into play. And so from a quality of hire perspective, in terms of graduation rates and success rates, on the inbound side, we saw about a 2% increase in our graduation rates, which is great. On the outbound side, however, which is, in my opinion, significantly more difficult to onboard and staff for, we saw a 23% increase in our graduation percentages. So from a quality of hire perspective, I mean, again, the numbers are there. They do speak for themselves. Inbound traditionally is, a little bit easier. It's never easy, but a little bit easier than the outbound side. But when I looked at those numbers, I reran them again, just in case. I was like, is this right? Did I make a mistake somewhere? But I mean, again, those graduation rates speak for themselves. We saw a little bit of a reduction in attrition. And the key point I want to highlight here is, when we're sending these invitations out to candidates, and those candidates are starting to respond, you're weeding out your passives versus your actively interested candidates. And so we're now essentially kind of putting the ball in their court. Hey, you applied for the position. Now it's your turn to come talk to us, right? And so I think that's what really took us to the next level in terms of success. It's putting the ball in the candidate's court. You're interested in this role. Let's talk about it. And then it adds that human piece, right? That human connection. You get to see the person face to face before you've made a commitment to, go in for an in-person interview or have a more detailed conversation. In our world, communication is key. Any recruiter, any talent acquisition specialist, the first thing that they're going to listen for, be it in a speed interview or over the phone for that matter, is that communication piece. And we can very quickly, within that 5-6 minute speed interview, assess a candidate's communication skills and ultimately determine, okay, let's go to the next question. This person has what I'm looking for.
Totally. And it's funny because, I love that you are one of the most data-centric people I know. No one has their numbers, almost no one, like you do. And that's amazing. When we look at the numbers, what we're also seeing is, because we see the data around this, but when you get 100 applicants, when you advertise your job, people are applying to no one applies to one job. They're applying to 20, 30, 50 jobs at a time without really reading where's the location, what are the requirements. That doesn't work for me. And so when you actually invite 100 applicants to an interview, that's when they're going to actually read the job description and see, is this for me? And we're only seeing half of the people click on that link to book or schedule an interview, which means 50% were never interested in the job. And you would have no way of knowing that other than just picking up the phone and dialing all 100 of them. And so it's interesting to see how that is directly affecting, your experience. I think the graduation rates are amazing. I think these are all really great data points around this new way of hiring. What about ads and advertising? Because again, when we talk about it's a tight market, the economy's tough, budgets are low, but we need to get top of funnel interest. And so we're advertising the job on Indeed, Facebook, Google, kind of wherever you can. What's been the impact to, your advertising budget?
So we all have to be cautious of our budgets and advertising costs. It's extremely expensive, and ultimately a cost to any organization. In terms of our budget, we've actually, since introducing Hello Hire, have been able to reduce our allocated budget for advertising. To give you an example, Indeed is very commonly used in the industry and everywhere, essentially from a staffing perspective. And regardless of whether or not you're on a pay-per-click model or if you've got campaigns running or anything like that, the longer you have it running, the more it's going to cost. And so one of the first things that I looked at when we were going through our initial few speed interview sessions and that very initial phase was what that did to the amount that the budgets that I was essentially allocating to Indeed. We were getting, for an example, we would get 100 applicants, and at that point I would pause our ad, and it would no longer cost me anything or cost the organization anything. So at that point, the ads paused, and I have now had my team able to successfully reach out to all 100 applicants. If you have a hiring requirement of 10 people, call it, you're now not keeping an ad active and having applicants apply for your role, and those applicants kind of go stale, right? So to answer the question, our costs were reduced, and essentially it made sense for having a subscription with Hello Hire, right? You reduce your costs here. Yes, there's an associated cost elsewhere, but if your overall cost is going to come down, it's a no-brainer, right? So
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, for me, at least it was a no-brainer. If I could allocate some budget that I had in one place elsewhere and make everybody's job easier, make us more efficient, that's the conversations I was having at that point. It was a no-brainer. It made perfect sense. Not only from a support perspective for my team and making their jobs, simplifying their jobs in terms of contacting candidates, in terms of efficiencies, and giving them time back in their day to do the things that we all want to do in the industry, right? All of the nice to haves that you don't traditionally have time for because you got to call 100 people and get your interview schedules booked up. We now have time for that stuff. We have time for the nice to haves, right? So reduce cost, more efficient, and better return, to answer your question.
Amazing. I appreciate you sharing your experience, because a lot of times when we're talking to contact center leaders, it's hard to understand the impact because it sometimes sounds too good to be true. And so you sharing, your experience as an industry veteran, it kind of adds validity there. you won't believe this, but the other day I was having a conversation with another contact center leader, a similar conversation, and he was asking, well, what will I do with all the extra time? He's like, what do your customers do when you give them back all of this time? And it was hard because I honestly don't really know, but one company is focusing those resources in the HR team on retention, right? And so instead of burning hours on administrative work on recruitment, you take that energy and shift it over to retention, which is equally important, right? I mean, is that something that you've been able to do, or does that make?
Yeah, so we got the time back. Two things came out of that. The first is we were able to take on more staffing initiatives. So while we did get the time back, our requirements also increased, right?
Right.
Which is great. It's great for business. But in addition to that, the other thing that we focused on and what I kind of geared my team to take on as a result was employee engagement. I think employee engagement is super, super important from a retention perspective, especially within the contact center world. They now have time for employee engagement initiatives, things that we just, the fun stuff in the office
Right.
that we traditionally were like, okay, yeah, it'd be nice if we had the time for that, but I got to hire 20 people. So, maybe not. So that's what I focused that extra time on. It was the employee engagement piece. It was connecting with the staff. Obviously, nobody was immune to the pandemic. Everybody dealt with that, and transitioning folks back to the office, kind of building a hybrid model. I had my team fully immersed in supporting with those types of initiatives, which was fantastic, because had we stuck to pre-speed interview recruitment cycle, we certainly would not have been in a position where we would have, in a position where we could have transitioned the team as smoothly, but then also not forgetting about the engagement piece and not forgetting that we're a people business, and without our people, we're nothing. And so you really need to appreciate your team. You really need to appreciate your employees. And how do you do that? Through engagement initiatives. And so that's what we did.
I love it. I mean, I've been running my own company for over 10 years, and I love employee engagement. Like, I love being engaged and a culture where, it's not just work, but there is additional value that I'm being delivered by relationships and culture and initiatives to give back, which, again, when you're running at full speed, it's hard to do. But I value that. And, as an employee of even my own company, I love it. So I see that's a great way to reallocate, time. Kat, if you had to summarize today's conversation, for the audience, again, we've got contact center leaders that are thinking about recruiting and retaining top agents. If there's 3 sort of takeaways for the audience, what would they be?
I think the first takeaway for me is stay ahead of the game, be efficient. The more efficient we are, the easier our jobs become. Our jobs will never be easy. We all know this. Everybody on this call knows this. There will always be market changes. There will always be challenges with candidates ghosting us. And so how do we stay competitive and how do we stay ahead of the game is we got to be efficient, right? So efficiency is key. The second piece to, what to take away from this is take a look at your recruiting cycles, right? See what's working and what's not working, and how can you do more with what you have. There's always a different way to do certain things. And sometimes people are reluctant and hesitant where change is concerned. Change management is the next thing, right? You got to be open to change. You got to be open to taking on new challenges. Our industry is ever evolving, ever changing, and we got to stay ahead of it. So that's the second piece. The third piece and take away from this is speed interviews work, guys. I'm going to tell you that they do. They certainly do. They've made our lives so much easier. You know, my recruiters constantly use the tool now on a regular basis. We don't have a hiring class that we don't use the tool for. Every single requirement, this tool is certainly used. Albeit our traditional recruiting cycle, I mean, if we don't get a hold of somebody, or let's say the session is fully booked and they reach out to us saying, hey, you know, I tried to schedule myself for this session and it's fully booked, we'll still revert back to our traditional methods as well. But at the end of the day, those folks are now contacting us, right? And so what that does is it reduces the number of people that are ghosting you. You know, one thing that I didn't mention earlier was the reduction in our no-show rates, right? No-show rates are like the bane of my existence. You know, that very first day when I have 12 people scheduled or 15 people scheduled to start with us, I have a rough time going to bed at night, because I'm like, what if I have too many no-shows, and then I'm going to be short on our requirements. So, you know, we saw a reduction there. It reduces the number of no-shows because these are the people that really want the job. And as the employer, we're getting to them first. We're connecting with them as soon as possible. We're going through those assessments, having those questions answered, and making sure that it's a skill match for both the employer and the employee, right? We got to be the right fit for the employee as well.
Totally. Thank you, Kat. Again, your insight has been super valuable. It's clear that hiring agents is harder than ever, and solving these complex challenges of today's labor market requires a shift in the way we think about recruiting. You know, you've taken a leap forward there, and you're seeing the results, but it's nice to know that we're not alone and that we can learn from strategies that are working for you and Zed Solutions. So thanks again for sharing your experience and knowledge with us today. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. We hope you walk away with some action items to take back to your companies. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mike to facilitate our question and answer. Mike.
Okay, great. Thanks, Raveen. I appreciate that. And thanks to you and Kat as well for, you know, sharing your experiences and ideas with everyone who's attended today. And there are a few questions that have come through the chat window. So I'll just highlight those for you. Great question from Wayne Goldstein, which was, either one of you can answer this. Do you have a pre-interview video to vet the candidate's language skills? Because you can see them, you can hear them, but do you have any kind of pre-interview video to help vet the candidate's language skills?
So Kat, maybe you can answer it and then I'll tell you sort of our perspective on that. But yeah, maybe Kat can go first.
So from our perspective, the way we incorporate language skill assessments actually happens after the initial speed interview. Our recruiters speak English. And so anytime we have a language skill set requirement, as part of the second piece of the process is when we'll introduce the language skill set. Having said that, though, the reason why that works for us is because all of our programs have an English requirement. And so when we start talking bilingual requirements, the initial assessment happens in English, and then the secondary assessment, providing the candidate checks off the boxes that we need them to check off, we'll jump into a secondary language assessment. So to answer your question, at this time, I don't have a video for language assessments. However, certainly on the list of things to look at for us.
And to answer it from sort of a platform point of view and what we're seeing from other contact centers, and Wayne, if you're referencing sort of pre-recorded video interviews where you would send the candidate a link and ask them to record themselves responding to questions, what we found is that introduces a very large drop-off rate at the early stage. And so what we're recommending is to use our pre-screening questions to really hone in on language skills. And again, if we take the bilingual example, often our customers will ask, this position requires you to be fluent in English and French. Part of the interview process will be conducted in French. Are you fluent in English and French? Yes or no? And when you ask the question in that way, right before an interview, you get an honest answer, because you can ask this up front. And a lot of times people will just say yes to go through the motions of applying to like 20, 30, 40 jobs. But this is where you're able to really hone in on people self-selecting out because they don't meet the sort of minimum requirements that you're looking for. And so that's how our customers are able to make sure that they're speaking to the right group of candidates. And then they would follow up that first initial communication assessment, speed interview with the language assessment or the behavioral assessment or other things that help you decide who you want to bring on board. The big difference in today's market is you can't lead with that. You can't just throw work at candidates and expect that your top applicants are going to do it and come through the process. And so you still need to make sure you're hiring the right people. And you don't have to it's not speed hiring, it's speed interviewing. And so there's nothing forcing you to hire somebody. You just hone in on the most interested and most qualified applicants quickly. But you still got to do your due diligence and your process to make sure you're hiring the right people. It just streamlines everything.
Okay, great. Thank you both for that answer. I've got one more question for you as well. This is from Samir Qureshi, and he's asking, how is AI going to play a role in running call centers in the next 3 to 5 years? And have you considered how this will change the way we work? One thing I'll mention too, Samir, and for everyone else who's here as well, is we actually are doing a dedicated AI, kind of like ChatGPT AI webinar, actually 5 weeks from now. That'll be on Thursday, April 27th. We'll devote a whole hour for that one about AI. But I'll ask specifically this question to both of you about AI when it comes to recruitment. And how's AI going to change recruitment, hiring, interviewing, et cetera, in the next few years?
So I can answer it. Yeah, I can answer it from our platform point of view. And I had a conversation with, again, an advisor recently about the same topic. And really, there is, when we're talking about people positions and people-centric jobs, the idea of putting robots and fake people in front of someone, it is, until you can't tell the difference, I don't think there's going to be mass adoption for that. But again, and there's bias built into systems, and I think it's still being perfect as we're making huge advancements with ChatGPT, but there is still room to grow. One of the interesting ideas we have is, when a candidate is in that waiting room, if they've got to wait a couple of minutes before their interview, right now we've got a video you can watch to keep you interested in learning more about the company. But someone recently suggested an idea of having a chatbot, AI driven, to answer questions that the candidate may have while they're waiting. And so, they can ask some questions and get curated AI generated responses that, give them, essentially help you sell your job and your company to the candidate while you've got them in a captive state. But yeah, Kat, I don't know, from, that's recruiting generally. I don't know if you have more insight about the contact center or even recruitment. Yeah, what do you think?
So from an AI perspective, call centers are definitely going to be impacted. It's in the works, it's coming. We all know this. Where we are currently, based on kind of what I've had visibility to, is that recruitment is certainly still going to be very much so a part of our lives. And this functionality is going to make us that much better. It's going to make us, again, more efficient. It's going to make us, one agent, for example, will be able to do the job of what we typically have 2 people for, at a very high level, obviously, without going into specifics. So will AI impact us? It will. We're at the early stages, and there's certainly more to come. And kind of going back to my last point about being open to change, right? We've got to be able to pivot. We've got to be able to be, ready for those types of changes and how it impacts our industry, specifically as it relates to staffing and recruiting and what that means for our futures too.
Okay, good. So it sounds like things are coming up in terms of AI definitely having that impact.
Yes.
All right, good. I've got one last question for you. This is from Christina Rivera from the Philippines. And she asks, is your pre-recorded video interviewing system evaluated by a recruiter? And it was a specific question. Good
question, Christina. And to clarify, so Hello Hire is not a pre-recorded video interview platform. In fact, we're very strongly against requiring applicants to record themselves on video as a first step in the process. And so, yeah, all of the Hello Hire interviews are live, one-on-one, face-to-face interviews between a recruiter and a qualified and interested applicant. I hope that answers it from the Hello Hire perspective.
Okay, great. Thanks, Raveen. So I want to thank everyone who asked questions. So, Wayne, Samir, and Christina, thanks for asking those questions. And as well, too, Raveen and Kat, I want to thank you both for sharing your time and your experience as well with our GTAC participants. And I also want to thank all of you as well who came out for today's session for, having a chance to go through this and be able to ask questions and hopefully learn some techniques and tips about being able to, just recruit and hire better people for your contact center. So thank you very much for coming out today. Our next webinar is actually coming up in 5 weeks. It's coming up in 5 weeks, Thursday, April 27th. That one's about the impact of advanced AI, including ChatGPT, on contact centers. And of course, again, our big conference, the full day conference, is coming up in September. That'll be in person in Toronto at the Pearson Convention Center. So thank you for coming out today and hope you have a wonderful afternoon. All right. Thanks, Kat. Thanks, Raveen, as well.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.